All right. Welcome to the Credit and Collection News podcast. We are really honored today to have a great guest. Kathy Kraninger is currently the president and CEO of the Florida Bankers Association. She's the fourth executive to hold the title since the FBA was founded in 1888. Making it one of Florida's oldest trade association. The FBA advocates on behalf of banks and promotes the banking industry in Florida. Previously, Ms. Kraninger worked in the federal government for over 2 decades. Congratulations on that. She has extensive experience in public service, having worked in Washington during four administrations. She's held leadership roles in the Department of Homeland Security and the Office of Management and Budget, as well as serving, of course, as the director of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau during the Trump administration, where she was the second leader of the CFPB. She was there from 2018 until she resigned in 2021. After that, in July, she moved on to the cryptocurrency world, right in the middle of its boom, working for Solidus Labs in New York. And from there, moving, of course, on to the Florida Bankers. So, Kathy, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, awesome. So let's talk a little bit about the Florida Bankers Association and what you're doing with the FBA, and start there.
Oh, sounds great. I was lured to Florida, as it seems that so many have been in the last few years, but it's a great opportunity to work for those who are really helping build their communities and build dreams. I mean, that's what bankers do. And looking at the association and the things that we're facing on the regulatory front in government, it was really something that made perfect sense for me. As you noted, I spent more than 2 decades working for the federal government, a variety of capacities. I understand how Washington works and how, frankly, how laws happen, how regulations happen, what people are looking for, the importance of that, frankly. I mean, frankly, it's a heavily regulated industry, and that's the history of it. And so absolutely, banks need to be following the law. But I think we have seen in recent years just a very strong pivot to, frankly, an environment that is not responding to all of the innovations that are happening, the expectations of consumers and customers. And that's what you need banks and bankers to be able to do, really serve their communities. And instead, we're in, check the box exercises with changing regulatory requirements and just a pile of paperwork. And at the end of the day, we've got to think about what we want our American, economy to look like, and who we want running and generating that economic activity, and really put things back where they belong. And so being able to lead this association and take it forward into the future, and really countering some of the dynamics we're seeing on the government front, those are all appealing and exciting things. So I'm happy to be here in Florida.
Awesome, awesome. How was the transition? I mean, working for the federal government for 2 decades and working under four different administrations, and it seems that each administration now is becoming more and more diverse from the previous administration. So things are the pendulum keeps swinging further and further apart. So how's this transition from going from, I would say a heavily structured federal government to the private sector, and obviously in associations, you know maybe a little less than a business, but on the other hand, how was that transition going from that? Obviously, going from Washington to Florida, I seems like everybody likes to do that, but how about the business side of it?
No, I mean, it has been fascinating. It is one of the reasons why I took this job, for sure, in terms of, we do actually have a for-profit entity as part of the association. We are otherwise a nonprofit, and have even a nonprofit foundation. So there are different facets to the association world that I found interesting, and is a good opportunity to get into looking at the revenue side more as less of an academic measure, I will say. I think at the federal level, we are certainly looking at the revenue in a little more academic way than an actual practical way, as in that being a constraint for our operating expenses. So I'm not saying anything revolutionary on that front, given that I worked in the budget world, but it is more academic and theoretical than practical. So I was excited to get into that side of things. Absolutely, those are the challenges that our members are dealing with as bankers. But in terms of my experience, it really was probably not your typical federal government experience. I was in political positions my entire career, just about, and they were also in very much startup arenas. So a lot of the jobs that I had, helping stand up the TSA, helping stand up the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11. I built a new office within DHS after that. When I ran the CFPB, it was certainly an organization that was still quite nascent and that had the opportunity to really decide what the culture and direction would be. And so that's the arena that I loved. I do feel incredibly lucky that my federal service was not, working on a law or working on an issue and keeping, banging my head against the wall to write new laws or new regulations that actually never saw the light of day. Because there are a lot of people in Washington who do that, but that is not the experience I had. So it was very dynamic, and really, I have been a change agent in my career, or at least seeking to smartly implement the changes that reflect what is happening in society or what needed to happen in government. And so that part probably made my career a little more dynamic than most.
Okay. Um, how do you like the private sector? I mean, is this like the next challenge in your life, or like, you know what, I'm good with this, or do you miss that, Washington DC bureaucracy?
Yeah, there are definitely things I don't miss. How about we throw that out there, Steve? But I'll say in terms of the things that are really do carry forward, what has always motivated me and what motivated my public service is mission. I am mission driven. Fundamentally, it's about understanding what we're trying to do and believing in that, and then really feeling committed to making it happen. And that was what happened in my federal career. And that really is what drove me to come down here. I like to be in a place where I know that I can personally actually make a difference and am adding value with my experience and my perspective. And so that's how I felt here. But that I do believe that we are at an interesting and potentially significant pivot point with respect to the banking system that has so well supported our democracy and our system of free enterprise in this country. I mean, we are the envy of the world. We still are. But the number of banks that we have in this country is just a dramatic fraction of where we were. And I think, again, regulation is having an impact on further pushing consolidation. So I believe in this. I believe in the role that community banks and banks of all sizes play in supporting those customers' dreams. And, the rest of the world doesn't have that. They aren't, private institutions or in a private sector environment. You're talking about government supported or even public institutions and government controlled institutions. So that has made our economy stronger, that has made our nation stronger, and it puts the institutions much closer to their customer base, which is where they need to be. So I think, again, that mission that we have at the Florida Bankers Association of promoting that system, of explaining why it's so important, not just to, of course, the bankers or believers and not just the policymakers, but starting to pivot that to the public and showing them the stark choices that we have ahead of us. That I think is pretty important. And so it is a mission that I continue to believe in.
Fantastic. You spent a lot of time in government, including the Committee on Appropriations in both the Senate and in the House. How do you use that kind of experience in your work today, and taking that, all that history and then utilizing it in today's world? Because it's, there's not many people that can say that they've been involved in that. So I think that's something that obviously is to your advantage, and do that. But I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
Oh, absolutely. I'll say the authorizing committees, and I did work on one in the Senate as well. So I've had the experience of being on both sides of the fence. They tend to get the attention, but at the end of the day, as we know, so many things are about the money. And so actually understanding how the appropriations process works, how the budget process works, having been in the administration and building budgets for organizations, seeing it all the way through to how Congress receives that and manages that, and the role that the appropriations committees really play in overseeing not just how much money the organization should receive, but how they're actually spending the money that they have received. It is an ongoing process that I have tremendous respect for. It's a huge part of Congress's power of the purse that comes through the Constitution. And unfortunately, as we have seen with many other things, and particularly with respect to Congress's role, that role is denigrated when the appropriations process doesn't happen on time. And so that is definitely one thing that that I believe in and have seen. But in terms of how that experience helps me here, it really is, again, what is the battle rhythm in Congress? What are the different mechanisms and committees? How do you pull and engage different levers as you're looking to accomplish what it is that we need to accomplish for our members and for bankers across the country. It really is that perspective and understanding of what that means and how it works and how agencies operate that I believe is certainly valuable here. And then, as I said, I spent a lot of time dissecting budgets. Of course, have an organizational budget here at the FBA. So how do we think about that? How do we execute it? There are, though, I'll say, significant differences between how the private sector does that and the public sector does that, as you can well imagine. And one of them, as I noted already earlier, was the notion that you're actually constrained by what that revenue picture looks like and what the profit expectations are. So that is a completely different dynamic for private sector players.
All right. How about your thoughts on the CFPB? Obviously, the CFPB is a very large regulatory and probably one of the most powerful new regulatory thoughts from government, and your thoughts are coming in as the second person in charge of the CFPB, Richard Cordray obviously being the first. But that was a dramatic change because with the different dynamics of the new administration and the thoughts of changing, of a leader, can the president change it, can not, things like that. What are your thoughts when you first came into the CFPB and your thoughts to where it's kind of migrated to where it is today?
It was truly, I think, a fascinating opportunity, an important mission that the agency has. I've tried to pivot the conversation on the CFPB because regardless of whether you think it should have been created or not, it exists. And fundamentally, that was where the administration came down. I mean, the president said, you need to run it. There's an organization that obviously exists, go do what the law requires and the mandates and do it truly and faithfully. And that is what I sought to do and what I think really is important for every agency to do. I think the challenges with that particular organization, with the way it was established, is that there were not too many checks and balances on it. And I guess theoretically can understand why that was, though I completely disagree with it. And as you saw, certainly with the case while I was there, with state of law, that the Supreme Court determined that the CFPB director does serve at the pleasure of the president. Which I think makes perfect sense. I mean, ultimately, what you get into with the other removal mechanisms are just a total contortion or fabrication. I mean, you could have had somebody just completely tarred and feathered and make things up and ruin their reputation and everything else to get them out for cause. Why is that necessary? This is a political process. Don't pretend it's something different. At the end of the day, the president should be able to, at least propose his team to the Senate. The confirmation is the check on that. And then the president can remove those individuals and put other people in place too. So that is something that I supported. And that's also ultimately why I resigned in January 2021. So that is certainly one piece of it. But the other gets back to how much power you had as that sole director with respect to the funding. I mean, it really, there are not many limiting factors there. It's a quarterly letter
Hmm.
that the director of the CFPB just writes to the chairman of the Federal Reserve and says, hope you're having a great day. Please give me, $200 million. I mean, it's literally that simple. And it is, I think, probably dictates more if we're talking about accountability to the American people for what that agency delivers. And I believe strongly in that and in transparency. There were a lot of things that I tried to do with respect to the culture of the agency to really bring that to bear and get us back to exactly what the law required of us and how we use the tools that we had, and not just, again, enforcement or a posture of punishment, but fundamentally, just as when you get to most people have good intentions, not all. Most organizations have good intentions, not all. But if we approach it from a punishment standpoint and don't set rules for everyone about how you expect a good actor to act, you end up with a chaotic system. So fundamentally, it's about putting the rules in place for good actors and then addressing those that are not operating within that framework. And the other thing I would note too, with respect to the CFPB, is empowering consumers. I mean, the history of consumer financial protection and of so many of the consumer protections that were put in place going back to the 70s, it's about information, disclosure, transparency, enabling people to make the best decisions for themselves and not imposing the government's will or one particular director's, will and intention and direction about what is, good, bad, or anything else because they don't like it. That is not a rational way to put a regulatory framework into place. And so it really is about, how do we make sure that that the system for or the services that are available and financial products that are available are all being provided in a fair marketplace that is transparent and is competitive.
Okay. So what were kind of your best memories working at the CFPB? Hopefully there's lots of them, but what kind of stood out as some of your best times there at the CFPB?
Oh, there are many. Look, there were truly dedicated people at the CFPB. I mean, up and down the board. Well, I may not agree with every single one of them on every topic. Frankly, there's never going to be two human beings that are going to agree on everything. And so that is, what I remember the most is definitely just fantastic, hardworking people, having the ability to see people run with things. I mean, as a manager, that's the part, and a leader, that's the part that I love. I mean, setting that tone and direction, being the support for them so that they can come to you where they're having issues, and being able to see that and harness the power of 1,500 people really targeted at a mission. I'd say that's the first and foremost thing. Everything is dynamics around that. We did have a lot of successes around, working with our fellow agencies. One thing that I'll say too is that the history of the CFPB, it came along because others made mistakes. I mean, again, according to Congress, well documented in the financial crisis, and you even had an agency that was abolished, obviously in the Dodd-Frank Act. So that's a tough time to come in. And then, of course, in the beginning, the CFPB felt strongly that they needed to take all kinds of enforcement actions. And again, it was the idea that we're doing this because you didn't do it and you failed. So really trying to bridge that gap of, the government agencies that do affect financial institutions and oversee their activity. There are a lot of them. And so making sure we didn't send mixed messages, we were actually working in a unified fashion with different authorities, but working again consistently, coherently. So I chaired the FFIEC, which is really about examination and supervision standards and having that uniformity across agencies. That was the first time the CFPB chaired the FFIEC. So it was a great body and opportunity to work with the FDIC and NCUA, with the state superintendents as well and commissioners. So great opportunity with the FFIEC chairmanship. So we did do some refreshes on different policies, looking to work together on even fair lending. We tried to do some things on fair lending in that arena too to create consistency. together. And the last thing I would note is that I think I did the CFPB a pretty big favor. We actually put everybody in one headquarters building so that the headquarters building renovation project got lots of renown, but by the time I got there, we still did not have the entire agency in the same building. Enforcement and general counsel were actually 4 blocks away. And so, that just was very odd to me, particularly given that it was a more modern organization. We had a hybrid workforce fundamentally. So when I walked around, a lot of empty space sometimes. So how do you make sure that we actually have everybody, working together, working in the same place, having that workplace flexibility? And so we did actually, it was early in 2020, and I suppose prescient given how empty the building was after that. But definitely, we brought everybody into one building, and we're really looking to make, again, further kind of cultural improvements around making sure people are working together and able to work together well. But that's something that'll take a little time, but we did save money there. So again, a lot of I suppose great memories. I'll note pointedly, it's not like I named a regulation to you or anything else, because when I talk about great memories, I'm not really thinking about the the rules that we implemented, the enforcement actions that we took. My visits out to exam sites and with exam teams, but it's really about the people and making it a work environment that makes them most productive.
Well, looking at the opposite side of that, what were some of the challenging things that you had at the CFPB? I mean, obviously, it's a new organization, in Washington, D.C., which is even more challenging. But what were some of the challenging things that you ran into at the CFPB?
Like it's no surprise that there was never going to be a nominee from President Trump that the Democrats were going to actually support. So I'll say that if you start from the very beginning of the story as a former appropriations staffer and Senate staffer, and you hear on the Hill, many of your listeners might not know this, but they're really on the Hill, Republicans, Democrats, and appropriators, because at the end of the day, we were always about getting the deal done, getting the government funded, finding practical solutions to things. And frankly, we were in the details of implementation on good governance, really, and good government. So that was a saying for a long time. I don't know that it's still entirely true, but it was a different kind of cast of people in terms of how we operated on the Hill, and it was a very bipartisan operation on the Appropriations Committee. And so that's the way I had operated in my space. I worked for Secretary Mineta, who was the Democrat in President Bush's cabinet at the Department of Transportation. Truly an honor. He was a phenomenal leader, American. And yes, so I was in the Peace Corps, which I know you know. So I have a lot of friends who are Democrats. I am a Republican. That is not in doubt or in question. But bottom line is I care about good government. And so when you talk about having me being nominated by the president, it really was about how do we run the CFPB, as I said, and be true to its mission in law and exercise good governance. But as I said, from a political standpoint, that was never going to win over anyone. So the fact that my vote was party line, it was to be expected. But I'll say for me, that was definitely a personal challenge because I really felt like I should have had support from both sides of the aisle. And I continued to carry myself the same way that I always had. I called, all of the Democratic leadership and Republican leadership when we were making a decision or an announcement. Never sought to surprise anyone, always explaining why we're doing what we're doing and why the decision was made. But I will say that was definitely a continuing challenge. I built some great relationships with Democratic members of Congress, but at the same time, that didn't exactly get the chance to manifest itself in public hearings, as you can well imagine. So I would say that was definitely one that was a disappointment that was kind of always in the back of my mind. But otherwise, I mean, it really is the issues themselves and really grappling with the fact that public policy is complicated, it's complex, it's multifaceted, and people want sound bites and people want fast action, and those kinds of things don't lend themselves to again, well thought through policy that was implemented. But from my standpoint, I felt it was a responsibility to keep, again, keep doing that. So there is, as I probably started this podcast with you on, Steve, there are a lot of things that you end up banging your head against the wall about. There's no doubt about it. But I guess I have a hard head, so it works out.
Well, like I said, you survived all those decades in DC, so hats off to you, because that's a challenge in itself. Anybody that can survive different administrations, and it seems to be harder and harder as we progress. Because at one point it seemed that a moderate Democrat and a moderate Republican, you couldn't tell a lot of the differences. There obviously were some, but it wasn't so significantly different. Now it basically, you're either red or you're blue, and there's nothing in between. So it's a lot different, and we see that. If there is a change in the administration, and there might be, I mean, we still have 4 months to go before the actual election, and it's, as everyone seems to be referring to now, is it's election season. So we're almost into it, where early voting starts shortly. If there is a change coming into the CFPB, and we don't know that yet, because it depends on who gets in, and then what happens with the Senate. But if there is a change, is there any advice you'd offer to someone who was offered the position at the CFPB, and know the answer cannot be quickly run away to Florida to enjoy the weather and get out of there, but just more, you've done it, you've gone through the process, and all that. What would be some advice that you might offer to someone that suddenly is in that position?
I mean, you mentioned it, Steve, in terms of what we're all witnessing. It is a pendulum swinging as we get to, changing administrations every 4 years or 8 years. But when the first part of the agenda is like just undo everything the last guy did, that really is not going to support a strong economy and a strong democracy. I mean, it just is not. We as financial institutions are tend to be longer term thinkers and should be. I mean, I think we want to reward longer term thinkers, or should, for the future of this country, and not just be thinking about, the next day or the next month or the next quarter. You really should be thinking about longer term. And that is one thing that I think is a frustration, because if you're chasing that pendulum, and that's what I would say to the next CFPB director, or frankly, even after if Rohit serves out 5 years, who comes after him, however that works out. It really is thinking about your legacy and impact and the agency's mission and reputation, if you will, in terms of, is it a serious regulator? Is it one that is, you know, following the administrative process as they well should, and really putting the policy chops to the proposals rather than, bending to political whims or wills. I mean, that is what we should be thinking about. At the end of the day, this is about consumers. And as I said, it's about what is really disclosure and fair and competitive marketplaces. And so that's the lens and the rubric that should be at play here. Definitely taking firm enforcement action against bad actors. There's no doubt about it, and that's important, and that is certainly something that I did. But it is also about looking to empower consumers and thinking about the entire ecosystem, and not just again, one enforcement action. So I think that is at least the advice for what it was paid for. As you just noted, not a whole lot. My own blood, sweat, and tears is what developed that advice, but it really, I do think, is important for the country.
That's strong advice, and whoever comes in next, I'm sure they're going to listen, and they're going to, that is something to take in. More on the personal side, I found out something about you that I didn't know when we were, setting up the podcast. But I won't spoil that. You already kind of mentioned it. But what are some things that people don't know about you? I mean, you ran the CFPB, you're in Washington for all that time, and now obviously you're running the Florida Bankers. But what are some things that people don't know about you that, you know what, they can sit back and say, oh, I didn't know that. And so that it's a more personal side, but it actually, it kind of breaks down those walls of somebody looking and say, oh yeah, that was the Republican nominee. We don't want to talk about that, or that's not the important thing. People are still people, and so that's from that standpoint. Toss out a few little things that people are like, oh wow, that's something new. That's exciting.
Yeah, well, I can certainly talk about one of my hobbies, something that I love to do. I can't say I have that many, big secrets that I'm going to reveal to you here, but I'll say one thing in particular. Since I just came off of a challenging one overseas, I love to hike. Actually, being able to walk anywhere. I walked in Washington all the time. In fact, I was there last weekend and I did that too, even though it was literally 95 degrees. And while I was wandering around the city, I was wondering what I was doing. It was in a particularly hot stretch with no trees. I was like, why am I out here doing this? But it's literally because I love to hike. I love to walk. I love the way I can think and really have, thoughts go through. I don't listen to music while I'm doing it, but I can hike and walk for hours. So when I was moving to Florida, one of my biggest concerns was how flat it is. There's just not a lot. And I am the most hilly probably city in Florida, in Tallahassee. So I do enjoy walking around here, and I do it despite the crazy heat that we have at this point in time. But last week I was actually in one of the narrowest and deepest canyons in Europe. So I had a good hike there, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. Really fantastic way, as I said, to clear your mind. And they really do say nothing like moving your own 2 feet in terms of that connection between mind and body. So something I truly enjoy, and it's also always great when I do find other people who are going to do it with me. So I was not alone in Italy, which is nice, but a lot of times it's my own wanderings.
Well, at least it gives you that time to think and ponder and do that. I know that you were also in the Peace Corps, and you were in Ukraine during that, and I think that was I found that fascinating because, again, obviously, the world is looking at Ukraine as one of those places that everyone's paying attention to. But to be in the Peace Corps there, and I don't know if you still have any ties back to Ukraine and stuff, and stay in constant look. But that was, I thought, something again for again, throwing all politics aside, fascinating, because you're like, wow, that again, somebody that's in government, that somebody has actually experienced something and can talk about a country that most people didn't up before the war started even knew where Ukraine was located. So from that aspect, I'll let you talk just a little bit about that, just because people
No,
are like,
happy to.
okay.
Since I mentioned Peace Corps already, I wasn't sure if I should go there, but no, I do still have ties in Ukraine. I have some of my best friends from life were fellow Peace Corps volunteers, and some of them are even have been back in Ukraine recently, and I do have Ukrainians that I'm close to who are still there. So it is incredibly heartbreaking to see what's happening there, and the political dynamics around it in this country are also probably fairly frustrating to me. But that's my own personal view and not anything on behalf of anybody else. But it was a phenomenal experience. Talk about understanding what the impact of communism and socialism is on a society, what the impact of being really a kind of a crossroads. Ukraine was always a crossroads through history. So the reason we knew it at all was, and you might remember this, Steve, it was basically called the breadbasket of the Soviet Union when I was in
Absolutely,
social studies and everything else. So that's about all anybody knew about it. There must be a lot of wheat fields there, and that's what they have in Ukraine. But frankly, it has a really strong national identity. But for so many I mean, centuries. It was just a place that was a crossroads between Asia and Europe and conquering entities and everything else. So Ukraine really coming into its own as a nation is really a post Soviet Union phenomenon. And so their ability to really do that on their own has been fantastic to see. And frankly, the unity that they have behind that nation and President Zelensky and the strength and resilience of the Ukrainian people is truly admirable. And I certainly am doing what I can to help not only the people I know, but to help the future of their democracy.
Fantastic. Well, Kathy, it's been a pleasure chatting with you for the past half an hour or so. I've certainly learned a lot. Um, we have a conference coming up in 2025 in April, which is supposed to be, we're actually looking at Florida to host it. I think we're going to be a little bit further south down in Miami. But would love to have you come to the show and talk to the attendees. It's all banks and finance companies and credit unions and those that service them, like collection agencies and attorneys. I think they would all be fascinated. I think they'll listen to something like this and say, "Wow," and I know that's something we'd be interested in. So I won't put you on the spot and actually, get look for an answer right now, but we were certainly be interested in further talking about that. And like I said, would love to have you there because obviously what you've done in the past and what you're doing right now is very relevant to the industry, and that's kind of why we like to talk to people who are influencers in the industry and are a big part of the industry. And you certainly have been over your career. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you
Um,
for that. And I'll just say Florida is a phenomenal place to have conferences. So you definitely should come to Florida.
we've been there a few times, and every time we've come, it's since it's in April, it's a perfect time. It's a great time to actually walk around and do that. We haven't run into the 99 degrees and 98% humidity summertime things what we're looking at.
Not that bad.
We
Not that
uh,
bad.
remember,
Not that
I'm
much
in.
worse than DC, frankly, as far as after being there for more than 20 years.
Yeah, we've done a lot of shows in DC as well. So that we've done. Usually that's August, September, which is a little tougher. So yeah, that's we do appreciate air conditioning all that much more when you're dealing with that. So again, thank you for your time. We appreciate it, and like I said, love to have you back on the podcast and hopefully have you come speak to the group in person. So
Thank you so
with
much.
that, again, thank you so much for coming, and we appreciate everything that you do for the industry. And now that you're in the private sector, representing the banks industry is even better. So thank you for that. And with that, we'll conclude this podcast, and we'll look forward to the next one.